So we're going to be here with a little bit of a longer video today, because I want to have a little bit of a discussion. And one of the things I think a lot of people really forget is that killers generally tend to run the same few selection of perks. If you look at like meta perks, even if you're including some of the offshoot ones, what do you normally see? Nurses, Barbecue, sometimes Bitter Murmur, sometimes Blood Warden. You know, sometimes Franklin, sometimes Devour, sometimes Huntress Lullaby, sometimes Haunted Ground. You'll see Noed, you'll see Ruin. Sometimes you'll see Overcharge. Bamboozle sometimes. Tinker sometimes. Rancor sometimes. You definitely see Pop. You definitely see, like, Save the Best for Last. Sometimes Thanatophobia. You see Enduring. You see Spirit Fury. You see Sloppy Butcher. And really, that's about it. The pool of perks that you see is quite limited. So, I want to touch on killer perks and how to expand them. And now, not all of these are bad perks that I'm going to be talking about. But it's just like how to tweak them to make them a bit more commonplace in the meta. Like, we're going to look at nurses. Nurses we're not going to touch. Nurses is fine. And the reason why I'm saying, like, a perk may be overpowering. Like, for example, Barbecue and Chili. Barbecue and Chili is a very strong perk. It's not overpowered, though. I see a lot of people say, oh my god, nerf Barbecue. No. I mean, it's a stackable blood point bonus that decourages tunneling. It is a aura reveal on survivors that are far away from you, which decourages camping. The whole design of the perk is to keep people from camping and tunneling. And it's not too overpowered. It's an aura reveal, and by the time you get to where the survivors actually are, the aura reveal isn't that helpful. Other than that, the blood point gain. So, we're going to go through the killer perks, and we're going to talk about changes that can be made. So, we'll go alphabetically. Nurses, we're not going to touch. Agitation, we're not going to touch. Barbecue, we're not going to touch. Bitter Murmur, we're not going to touch. Now, I want to put a preference here. Not all of these ideas are original. Some of these ideas are from people I've heard, from people I've talked to, as well as some of my own opinions. So, this is not like, hey, you know, I'm taking credit for all these ideas. But I have seen some people say, like, well, Bitter Murmur is very weak. Bitter Murmur doesn't get played as much. This can fix it. Nah, Bitter Murmur's fine. Blood Warden's fine. I'm not going to mess around with that. Bloodhound, Brutal Strength, we're not going to mess with those. Chlorophobia is something interesting I want to touch upon. I think Chlorophobia is like a fringe perk that's like just outside of being played because it's just not quite there. So, right now, survivors within your terror radius have a 50% penalty to healing progress at tier 3. I think that there should be a built-in unnerving presence on healing skill checks. I think skill checks should be smaller and more frequent. Or skill checks are smaller, and there's no great skill check zone. So make them like auto-didex skill checks, but with that benefit to it. I think that would make the perk a little bit more valuable, because it makes it a little bit more tense. It's still RGN, and good survivors will still be able to hit it, but I think just that added element to it makes it a little bit stronger. Cruel Limits. You know, in all honesty, Cruel Limits is really shit. Like, I've played it. The fact that most of the time you're only going to have 2, maybe 3 vault locations that are getting blocked off, unless you're on, like, Hawkins. Because I ran it on Lurie's. And 3 gens popped. And each time, only 2 vault locations got blocked because of the range. I think Cruel Limits needs an additional effect. I think it needs... You either have to increase the range dramatically, or it needs an additional effect. So, if Cruel Limits worked where when survivors pop the last gen, the exit gates can't be opened as well, I think that could balance it out if you don't want to give it a range limit. I think that gives it a little bit... It's like an end game before the end game, but I don't know. I just don't... It's not significant enough. Dark Devotion. Dark Devotion's a very, very weak perk. You do not see this run. So the way it works right now is you become obsessed. Hitting the obsession with your M1 causes the obsession to emit a 32-meter terror radius for 30 seconds, and your terror radius is reduced to 0. No one uses this. I would change this. So I would make it whenever the obsession... First off, you have to hit the obsession. It doesn't matter. You have to hit the obsession to get it to activate. You could make it a token-based perk. So you could make it like... Start off with 1 token, and then 2 tokens, and then 3 tokens. So every time you hit your obsession, the tokens refresh. So every time a survivor is working on a generator, that terror radius is emanating from the obsession while they're on the generator. So it is the actual obsession that is the center of the... Just like regular Dark Devotion, but it activates while they're on a generator. And every time a survivor gets off the generator, you lose a token. And the amount of tokens you have means you have to hit them again in order to reset the tokens. So it's kind of an interesting system, because you have to hit the survivor. Let's say you have it at tier 3, so that'd be 3 tokens. That means that the survivor can get off a gen 3 times and emit a terror radius every time they get back on the gen. And then you have to hit them again to basically refill those stacks. I think that discourages maybe some cooperative play, like Better Together and stuff like that. And as a killer, you'd be able to hear that terror radius, so you'd know what gen they're working on. Maybe that's a bit too strong of a tracking perk, but I think the perk itself right now is just unplayable. Distressing. One change I would do is pretty much just remove the percentage. Like tier 3 is a 26% increase. Make that in meters. Just make that a flat increase, whether it's like 8, 12, 16, something like that, how it stacks. Just give us an actual number to play around. Dying Light, they just reworked that, so we're not going to touch that. Franklin, I'm not going to touch. Furtive Chase is an interesting one. It has some play, but it's very meme-based. So the way I would make this is, you become obsessed with one survivor. Right now, when the obsession gets hooked, you get a token. When a survivor pulls the obsession off the hook, they become the obsession. And when the obsession dies, you lose all your tokens. And what the tokens do is they decrease your terror radius in a chase. I would change that. I would add the... Whether you add it, or whether you, in addition to this, or you change it, I would make it so instead of the terror radius decreasing in chase, which is not really that helpful. Realistically, when you're outside of a chase, you use the terror radius to find out what the killer is. When you're in a chase, you use the red sting. That's why moonwalking is so effective as a killer, because, I mean, you're already in the terror radius. That doesn't help you as a survivor. But you need to know what they're doing, which is where the red stain comes in. So what I would do with Furtive Chase is I would make it so that the terror radius and the chase music would cut out in intervals, depending on how many tokens you have. So, like, let's say at tier 3 it would cut out every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds, for a duration of 2 or 3 seconds, the terror radius and the chase music goes away. And then 2 or 3 seconds later it comes back. and then 2 seconds later it's gone. And it like alternates between chase and not chase. Now that's still a pretty meme-y type perk, but I think that works a bit better. Devour is actually a small change in my opinion. So right now, the way it works is you gain a speed boost for 10 seconds after hooking a survivor for a duration of 10 seconds. That's at 2 tokens of Devour. I would change that. So what I would do is Devour Hope at 2 tokens. I would make it so the aura of 2, 3, or 4 survivors is revealed to you whenever someone is unhooked. So that's the benefit to 2 tokens of Devour Hope, is it gives you a little bit of an aura reveal. Because that gives you a target to go after, a new targets to go after, rather than just tunneling. Haunted Ground, not gonna touch. Huntress. People say Huntress Lullaby is weak, and that it needs a rework. I don't think it is. I'm not gonna mess with Huntress. Noed. Now, Noed is by no means a bad perk, like Devour isn't, but I want to talk about Noed specifically. Right now, Noed is a bit of a cheap way for a killer to get a kill. It's one of the things, you don't know if they have Noed until the Exegator popped, and it's like, hey, I'll protect you, I'll body block Noed. Well, you're fucked. So, I would rework Noed like this. I would make it a token-based perk. I know I'm doing that a lot, but I think that item management does help create some tension a little bit. Like resource management, basically in-game. So the way it would work is, each time you hook a survivor, you get 1 token. We're gonna make this a bit like Save the Best for Last. So hooking survivors grants you tokens. When the Exegator powered, Noed activates, and every survivor suffers from the exposed effect when you hit them. But in order to apply that exposed effect, it consumes tokens. So at tier 3 of the perk, it would consume 2 tokens every time you hit a survivor. Now the survivor is immune to this exposed effect if they have not been hooked. So let's start there. So you can't penalize a character, a survivor who hasn't been hooked, because you get that a lot in games where people, the first time they get hit is by Noed, and that's where they die, basically, because they got hit 1 time with Noed. And it would scale to, like, you know, tier 1 would be 4 tokens, tier 2 would be 3 tokens, and tier 3 would be 2 tokens. Still sick, deal with the cough. So, you could generate a maximum of 8 tokens if you had all 4 survivors hooked twice. Which means you could use Noed 4 times and get the 4 survivors if you had the perk at tier 3. Or you could just get 2 people. And I think that would make it a bit more rewarding, because right now it's like, the killer doesn't have to do anything but let the gens the gen rush go on, get the gens done, and then all of a sudden, the gens pop, the killer comes out with Noed, and they get 2 or 3 kills out of it, even though they did nothing the entire game. It basically rewards killers for doing nothing. So, that's why I think it needs a little bit of a rework. Ruin, we're not gonna touch. Third Seal, not gonna touch. Infectious Fright. I think Infectious Fright is quite shit, to be honest. I really do. One thing I would say with Infectious Fright is, I would make it, first off, it needs to go back to an aura reveal. It shouldn't just be a notification, like Rancor. Like, I'll run Rancor if I want that effect. I get a Mori at the end of it. I don't need Infectious Fright for that role. So it should go back to an aura reveal. Or, you could make it so that any survivors that you down and are on the ground recovering make it so that those survivors give away your position while you're healing and recovering them. So if you slug somebody and they're on the ground and another survivor runs over to get him back up, it reveals the aura of the survivor that got them back up. So it's kind of like a reverse buckle up. So Insidious I would completely rework. I don't like Insidious in its current form. I don't think it's very smart. I would rework Insidious and give it a passive effect and a primary effect. So right now, it is pretty much a douchebag camping perk that you see a lot of Leatherfaces use. I've seen some meme builds where you have like Wraith, where Wraith has the add-on where your terror radius isn't suppressed while you're in cloak, but you get bonus blood points out of it. So they run that add-on with Insidious, so they can stand still in cloak and still lose the terror radius in camp. So what I would do is completely remove Insidious how it functions right now, and change it so that standing still for a little bit longer. So let's say, depends on what killer it is. Make it like Nurses, where Nurses is based around your killer's terror radius. So the Nurse, the Hag, who have smaller terror radiuses, the size of it is smaller. Trapper, you know, Billy, where they have larger terror radius, they have a little bit of a larger effect for Nurses. Make Insidious based off the power. So the way it would work would be, if you stand still for, say, 5 seconds, your power will automatically reset. So for somebody like a Spirit, which has a lengthy recovery on that cooldown, for the power, do you just stand still for 5 seconds to get that power back, and then it has an internal cooldown? But then somebody brought up the point, well, what if, you know, you're having a killer like Billy? The cooldown's not going to matter because the chainsaw is up as soon as you're done chainsawing. It's ready to go again. So that's where the passive bonus would come in, where standing still for the equivalent amount of time would give you a blood point bonus. So let's say, like, if you are a hillbilly and you're just standing still for a second, you stand still for like 5 seconds, you get 1,000 blood point gain. Because that does give a reason to play it if you're in a blood point build, as well as just making it not entirely cheesy. Iron Maiden's pretty easy. They just need to extend the exposed effect a little longer and the location reveal a little longer. Maybe put an internal cooldown on it if they want to make it really long. Like, say this effect can only activate once every 30 seconds. But they can make it so that the duration lasts longer. But, I don't know, right now it's just not effective. Lightborn. Lightborn's a really fun perk for me. So I have two fixes. Right now it's not good. It's not that hard to avoid flashlights as a killer. And there's realistically only 2 killers that benefit from Lightborn. Nurse and Wraith, and that's because it keeps them from getting burned out of their power. And I know how fun that is to do as a survivor because I had a Wraith game earlier today where I burned the Wraith out of his power 4 times and it led to me getting face camped. So trust me. Those are really the only 2 killers that need Lightborn. So the realistic one that I came up with, this is what should come of it, is that while you are flashlighting a killer, the item consumption is doubled. So you're burning twice the charges, and if you successfully flashlight blind the killer, you lose the maximum percentage of your flashlight. The meme build that me and another friend of mine came up with that is awesome. When you flashlight blind the killer, you blind yourself instead. Now, one person took it a step further and said, when you flashlight blind the killer, instead of blinding the killer, you're actually blinding the other 3 survivors. But that to me is just too stupid and too ridiculous. That would literally make flashlights useless in my opinion, because it's like, I'm gonna flashlight the killer! And then everyone gets a skill check at the same time and fails it because they're blinded. No, I can't do that. Mad Grit, I don't really have anything for Mad Grit. I do think it needs a buff, I just don't have anything for it. Like, maybe while you're carrying a survivor, in addition to the missed cooldown and hitting the attack, pausing the timer, it needs like another bonus if it needs to be effective. Like, hitting a survivor will also give you a short movement speed bonus. Something like that. Make your choice. I don't have anything for that. We're not going to talk about that. Mindbreaker. Mindbreaker's very weak. Mindbreaker's very shit. Something you could add to Mindbreaker would be to add a hindered effect to it as well. So, in addition to the exhaustion on a generator, first off, make it to 100%. So just, survivors are afflicted with exhaustion while working on a generator. Period. Not just while below 50%, but 100%. That would actually make it playable and have a meaningful in-game value. The other thing you could do would be to add the hindered effect, like I said, where it'd stack Tier 1, 5%, Tier 2, 10%, Tier 3, 15%. Slow effect on the survivor after they get off a gen. So it'd make it a sort of issue where you actually have to get off the generator when you hear the terror radius because you're going to need that time to get away. To, I can just finish this gen real quick and then I'll go. Like, it actually, you need an incentive to use this perk, and the problem is the design of the perk right now, there's no use for it. We're not gonna touch Monster. Monster Shrine. So we had 3 ideas for Monster Shrine. All of them involve scrapping the current basement bonuses they have. So one of them is going to be there, and then you can choose between the other 2 because they're both situational, and I like both of them. So whichever one you think is a bit more balanced. So first off, you get double the blood points when you hook survivors and sacrifice survivors on basement hooks. Now, how do you kill them faster? And now a lot of this stuff is built around like basement stuff, because I do think the basement build is a viable strategy. And I do miss the basement build. I think it is a good idea for a killer to focus around their lair. I mean, think about it. In a horror movie, you know, you go into the killer's lair, it's a high risk, high reward. Right now it's like, I'm gonna get the basement, I'm gonna get this chest, la 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 la. There's no risk if you get caught other than, oh god, no, someone come save me with borrowed time. So there's 2 penalties that we have on Monster Shrine. Only one of them would go into effect. So the first one is, I like to call this the anti-Kobe. So if you were to successfully unhook yourself off of a basement hook, if you do not have deliverance, I grandfathered deliverance into this because I don't think it should be fair that your perk get you killed in a sense. So I grandfathered that in. Deliverance is exempt, but if you Kobe yourself from a hook, you are instantly moored by the entity when you get off the hook. So your landing animation after unhooking yourself is the entity from the endgame collapse coming up and killing you. Just right then and there. The other penalty I came up with, and I like this better. So, the entity, if you look at Monster Shrine right now, so what you have is, one of the categories is faster entity progression, which is how fast the entity is actually killing you. I like that idea. I wanted to go with that. So guess what? For every survivor that is further than 32 meters away from the basement, there would be a numerical penalty towards your meter. So if the survivors are far away from you, and I talked about this with a friend about maybe increasing it to 40 meters to make it like barbecue. So, like, the killer can see everybody with barbecue if they're outside 40 meters. But that's a very killer-friendly idea, which is why I left it at 32 meters, but I'm open for that. Basically, if all 3 survivors are far away from the basement, the person on the hook dies very quickly. That bar gets eaten away, like say 5% 5% faster for each survivor that's away from the hook. And the closer the survivors get, the slower it goes down. So it put a race to sort of get in there and get the survivor off the hook, as opposed to survivors in the basement on first hook, and it's like, hey, we got 3 people on gens, we're just gonna pop these gens and then we'll come get you. Well, if you do that, by the time you go to get them, they could be dead. Just straight up dead. So it adds a bit of a high risk, high reward there. Some people said overcharge needed a buff. I'm not talking about that. Overcharge is fine. Place your food, not talking about that, that's fine. Pop goes the weasel, we're not gonna talk about that. Rancor, not gonna talk about that. Remember me. Pretty much all I would do is revert Remember Me back to where it was, giving it more stacks. So I would give it more stacks and a higher cap rather than adding more seconds per stack. Because that's something I've seen a lot of people say is like, you could still have it at 4 stacks, but you could increase those stacks to where they add more of a penalty per individual stack. I don't think with that. I don't agree with that. I think the point of Remember Me is that Remember Me plays like a torturous type of style of play, because you want to keep hitting that obsession. You want to let them run away and heal and hit them again, and let them run away and hit them again, so you can apply that effect, rather than just, oh, I'm gonna hit you twice, you're gonna die on hook and lull, the rest of the survivors are not gonna be able to get out. It used to be a 25 to 30 second additional opening. Right now it's 16 seconds. I would just revert it back. Because Remember Me really isn't that played. And if you want it to be played more, you just need to fix the numbers on it. It's not a big fix. Not gonna talk about Save the Best for Last. Not gonna talk about Shadowborn. Spies from the Shadows. We are gonna talk about that. This perk is not good. It has a 5-second internal cooldown for something that doesn't even require an ability. Like, this shouldn't even be a perk. So to make this effective, the way it would work is every time a survivor disrupts the crows and sets the crows off, it gives a 1-second aura reveal on that survivor, and it has a cooldown of 5 seconds on it. Not just a notification, because remember, all of the notifications sound the same. Tinkerer sounds exactly the same as failing a skill check, which sounds exactly the same as Spies from the Shadows, which sounds exactly the same as Rancor. All of these perks do different things. So I would think that you would want to take one of those away, so it's not so much like annoying visual notification for the killer. Surveillance we're not going to touch. Territorial Imperative. This perk is not played. There is no value to this perk in its current state whatsoever. So it reveals the auras of survivors when they enter the basement, and you are far away from the basement entrance, and it has a cooldown on it. No one uses this. So how would I make this perk usable? While survivors are in the basement and outside of the killer's terror radius, they cannot perform certain actions, like healing, searching chests, anything like that. The only thing that they're allowed to do is open lockers and unhook survivors. So if you are outside of the killer's terror radius, you cannot do, like, you can't go to the basement to heal, you can't even trigger abilities. So certain abilities will not work while you're in the basement. If you are outside the killer's terror radius, it won't work. And the reason for this is it gives the killer a bit more power. So for example, if you unhook a survivor outside of the killer and they're in the basement, usually the survivors are going to heal up in the basement and then they're going to go out. Well, this makes them leave the basement immediately. And if I know they just got unhooked there, I can immediately come back and make a play on a now injured survivor that can't heal. I think it gives the killer a little bit more power for a basement build as well, because it would mean they can't sabotage traps. So, if you're a trapper, you can't, they can't sabotage your bear traps. If you're a hag, they can't flashlight your hag traps. They have to work around that until you come back. Thanatophobia we're not gonna touch. People have talked about Thrilling Tremors needs a bit of a buff. I don't. I like the current state it's in. I'm not gonna talk about that too much. Same with Tinkerer. Some people said Tinkerer needs a rework. I'm not. Unrelenting is a big one that I think a lot of people... I see so many bad killers use it. And they try and use it to make themselves look good. It's not a good perk. Pretty much the way I would make Unrelenting work is... I would make it so that when you miss a swing on a sniper, your next swing within a limited window applies the exposed effect. That's the only thing I can come up with. And it would be a small window. 2, 4, 6 seconds. And if they miss again, the effect goes away until they break chase. So it only works once per chase. Now, this is very easily done by certain killers like Spirit and Mike. They could coax this out by just ending chase by using their power and then starting a new one. For a killer like Billy, he has to like dedicatedly leave that survivor and then come back. I think that's a decent advantage, but it is pretty powerful. Whispers we're not going to talk about, Bamboozle we're not going to talk about, they're all pretty good. My personal favorite is Beast of Prey. Now right now Beast of Prey is completely useless, but there's a very easy fix to this that I like. And I really want this to come into the game at some point. So right now the way Beast of Prey works is you get more blood points in the Hunter category, get rid of that effect. That effect is only there because they need to stack it. The real effect is the red stain disappears after you hit Bloodlust, and it stays hidden until you lose Bloodlust. But that effect is so insignificant. So I came up with a solution. Beast of Prey is an activatable perk like Dead Heart. The killer presses X, and they lose their red stain for a limited duration. Let's say 10, maybe 15 seconds. And the perk has a cooldown of 60, 50, 40 seconds. So you make it like an exhaustion perk, basically, but for the killer. Now, you think, well, where is this going to be useful? Like I said, back when I was talking about Fervative Chase earlier in the video, I said, when you're in a chase, normally you go by the red stain. When you're out of a chase, you use the terror radius. Using Beast of Prey in chase opens up new possibilities, because it's not removing your terror radius how I have it set up. It's just removing your red stain. Now you could pair this with Tinker, because Tinker hides your terror radius when a gen gets to 85%. Now if you run Tinker and Beast of Prey together, and you activate Beast of Prey whenever Tinker goes off, you've now taken away the main disadvantage to Tinker, which is that it doesn't hide the red stain. By controlling when you hide your red stain, you can win a lot of mind games in jungle gyms very quickly. Because a lot of survivors are able to prolong chases by using that red stain, force a killer to moonwalk. If a killer's not good at moonwalking, they're not going to be able to get the kill, and they have two choices: they just run away, or pretty much they just give up. As an activatable ability where the killer controls when and where to use the I can hide my red stain, they can give themselves a lot more opportunities to get kills. Corrupt Intervention, this is a strong perk that a lot of people don't think is good. I'm not the only person that doesn't think it's good. People either swear by it or they hate it, and I hate it. In my opinion, Corrupt Intervention is bad because it gives the survivors time to loot chests, find your ruin totem, and basically get everything else they need to do done before they start working on gens. So I would make Corrupt Intervention so that it blocks off totems and chests in addition to gens. Because then it actually is giving the killer time to set up. If you're somebody like a trapper that's running this to buy yourself some time so you're not gen rushed immediately, your ruin doesn't go out immediately, you can take that 2 minutes at the beginning of the game to go and set up shop. Because as of now, the setup for it is not very good. Basically, whenever I see Corrupt Intervention, it's like, okay, I got 2 minutes to find all the totems on the map and get rid of them. And by the time those 2 minutes are up and I go to work on gen, Ruin's out, Noah is out, Devour Hope is out, Haunted Ground is out. Whatever you're running, gone. So, I would make it block totems and chests as well, because it basically means the survivors have to go to the 4 generators that you want, or they can sit around and do nothing for 2 minutes, which is fine by me. Nothing for Deerstalker, nothing for Discordians, nothing for Enduring. Fire Up, I would give a bit of a percentage bonus. I would make it stronger. Mostly because you don't really notice the benefit of Fire Up until you get down to 1 to no gens left. And by then, you're usually focused about the end game and keeping people from escaping. So pretty much just give it a percentage change, number-wise. Hangman's Trick. This is an interesting one. No one uses this perk. So, what does it do right now is that, after 10 seconds, when a hook is destroyed because of a sacrifice or a sabotage attempt, it automatically gets repaired. So you don't lose hooks because of sacrifice, which is nice, but it's not worth a perk slot. You get a notification when everyone starts sabotaging the hook, which is very situational. And then the sabotage bear trap repair timer is reduced by 60 seconds, which only affects the trapper. Basically, you can keep all of these benefits and add an additional one, which the way I have it is, Hangman's Trick enables you to add an additional hook. Now, someone went so far as saying that it's an activatable perk, where you have an extra hook that you can bring with you in the game and press X and deploy it, which I thought was absolutely stupid. But maybe it makes the perk playable. I don't know, like an inflatable hook. I mean, that would be kind of funny. But I don't know about all that. We're not gonna touch Thrill the Hunt. We're not gonna touch I'm All Ears. We're not gonna touch Iron Grasp. We're not gonna touch Spirit Fury. We're not gonna touch Sloppy Butcher. We're not gonna touch Knockout. So we've got Predator, which honestly I had so much time deciding what I was gonna do with this. To be frank with Predator, I would make it so that each individual survivor would have different color scratch marks. So you could tell what survivors were where by their scratch marks. So, for example, every survivor in the game would get their own individual color. And if it was that survivor, I'm not talking about like, oh, you know, Bill gets this color and Claudette gets this color. I'm talking about the 4 survivors in the game would get different color scratch marks. So you'd have like green scratch marks, blue scratch marks, red scratch marks, yellow scratch marks, etc. for the 4 survivors. I think that would, as stupid as that sounds, I think that would let you track individual survivors better. Overwhelming Presence, right now it just affects, Tier 3 is item consumption rates are doubled while in the terror radius, but that basically is just a glaring notification not to use your item in the killer's terror radius. So I would keep that. I would add a passive to it, where every 15 seconds that you're in the killer's terror radius, you lose 5% of your item's rate. A friend of mine said if it's a skill check related one, if you failed the skill check, you would lose like a 10% chunk of the item as well. But you're not really going to be using your items in the killer's terror radius, so there's no real point to that. But I do like the passive overtime effect. The last three are Unnerving Presence, Surge, and Strider, and we're not going to talk about Strider. So for Surge, basically I would just make it so that Surge can apply Overcharge. That's the only real buff I can see to it. You can't really increase the regression penalty, because then it's too strong. You can't increase the radius of it, because then it's too strong. So maybe just let it apply like Overcharge or something like that. And the last one, Unnerving Presence, is right now it makes it so that while in the terror radius, skill checks are smaller and they have a greater chance of triggering, but good survivors aren't really bothered by this. And a lot of people think they can combo this with something like Ruin, but more often than not, it just means you hit the great skill check better. So what I came up with was, with Unnerving Presence, there'd be two additional effects. A, there would be a additional penalty for failing the skill check, like a 5% increased regression penalty with the skill check. And or the other effect that I came up with was that there would be a 50% chance that with every skill check that came up, it would be a Ruin skill check, even if they don't have Ruin. Now this would affect healing, sabotage, gens, it didn't matter. Basically it would make it so a good skill check would not progress, but not regress, and a great skill check would be a good skill check. So it'd be a little bit of a Ruin effect there, to like slow down. And that would especially work with things like Sabotage, more so than Gens. For Gens, it'd be annoying because there already is Ruin. But the RGN of it being a 50% chance each time you get a skill check means, you know, you might not get it, you might get it every 5 seconds. Anyways, that's my way of buffing some of these killer perks that we don't often see. Some of these were just me throwing shit at the wall, some of these were pretty heavily thought out, so hope this video has been educational. Bye-bye.